From a man who was rejected for his application to write the astrology column for the Wall Street Journal, this is the Daniel Natal Show. In the latest issue of the New American Magazine, Alex Newman has an article entitled "Communist China Infiltrating Everything." In it, we read, "It has become popular for conservatives to exclaim only half-jokingly that China owns Biden, and while it may sound funny to the uninformed, the reality is deadly serious. Unfortunately, Biden is just the tip of the iceberg. At all levels, U.S. officials, businesses, and media outlets are being compromised. In fact, whether the mass-murdering regime in Beijing officially owns Biden or not, it owns a growing array of assets among Western politicians, companies, technologies, media outlets, and more, a situation that threatens the survival of America as a free nation." The operative phrase here is the mass-murdering regime. The University of Hawaii did a study of democide to look at countries that murdered their own citizens outside of war, and it compared countries to Nazi Germany. Two nations dwarfed Nazi Germany's kill rate: the Soviet Union and the PCR, which stands for the People's Republic of China. This is just good to keep in mind, that while every politician is Nazi this and Nazi that, bragging about how they would never do business with Nazis, they apparently have no problem doing business with a country that killed far more people, and has never apologized. To do a deep dive into what's going on, the larger trends, it's good to understand how anomalous the United States is. As Americans, we take for granted the rich soils and navigable rivers that we have in America. For instance, historian Carol Quigley said that by 1900, America was producing more wheat than the next 5 countries combined. We have amazingly arable soil, while a country like China is 3/4 desert, with rocky soil and monsoons. This is why all throughout their history they've been stalked by famine. They're starving back in China, so finish what you've got. By contrast, the United States was so productive that global central bankers were worried about the problems this would cause with spot prices. A key fact of economics is that if you make more of something, the price comes down. So make a lot of wheat, and the price of wheat collapses. This is great for the consumer, but bad for global speculators. So they immediately started thinking of ways to keep spot prices artificially high by tamping down on America's productivity. As early as 1920, Frederick Soddy wrote a book that the technocracy movement thinks of as their Bible. It's entitled Wealth, Virtual Wealth, and Debt. Soddy wanted to decouple money from supply and demand and hook it up to energy consumption. This is where the technocrats got their idea for carbon credits. At any rate, Soddy back in 1920 wrote, "When one contemplates a country like the United States, which it has been computed could easily supply almost the entire wants of the whole world without overexerting herself, a country which has few real wants which it could not as well supply within its own territory, and therefore with little use for imports, but an almost infinite capacity for exports, the problem looks frankly insoluble." What Soddy was talking about was called a balance of trade problem in economics. America didn't need anything from the rest of the world. It could make all its own products internally. At its height in 1950, 85% of the world's goods were manufactured by America. So while we didn't need any of the imports from the rest of the world, we dominated the world's exports. This caused all the world's gold to flow into the United States like a magnet. The global central bankers didn't like that. So they thought it was of the utmost importance to kneecap America's productive capacity to make us rely on imports to get the gold to flow back out. They decided to do things like pay farmers not to grow wheat and other products. As Soddy suggests, large portions of the population should be encouraged to stay out of the labor force with recourse to welfare programs. The workday should be shortened to 4 hours, he suggested. And above all, Americans must be encouraged to consume more. He writes, "Whereas what each and all need in that case is leisure, to work less whilst consuming more, and to devote an increasing part of their lives to other pursuits than the earning of a livelihood and the amassing of wealth." Adam Curtis, in his documentary The Century of the Self, touches upon this transition of turning Americans from a country of citizens to a country of consumers.
In 1927, an American journalist wrote, "A change has come over our democracy. It is called consumptionism. The American citizen's first importance to his country is now no longer that of citizen, but that of consumer."
This mindset of turning us from citizens into consumers was reflected here in President George W. Bush's call to beat the terrorists after 9/11 by going out and shopping.
As we work with Congress in the coming year to chart a new course in Iraq and strengthen our military to meet the challenges of the 21st century, we must also work together to achieve important goals for the American people here at home. This work begins with keeping our economy growing. And I encourage you all to go shopping more.
Remember, this push to changes from producers to consumers was done to make us stop working internally in our manufacturing sector and to make us reliant on imports. This caused the wealth to flow out of the United States. The global central bankers, once worried that Americans were making 2 to 3 times the wages of the rest of the world, were now shaking the United States like a piggy bank to get the gold back out. They openly talked about what they called wage normalization between the United States and third world countries to bring our pay back into line with Mexico or China. Speaking of China, they were a big part of the plan to gut America's manufacturing base and to shift operations overseas. Now Americans would be reliant on imports like the international financial vampires wanted, and China inherited the growing middle class that used to be America's. President Xi Jinping has welcomed this transfer of wealth from the United States to China. He has openly stated that he is on board with the New World Order. Not only does he envision China gaining those manufacturing jobs, but he also looks over enviously at America's arable land, which he sees as a goal to help with China's food security problems. China is well aware of how anomalous North America is in terms of its fecundity. Just throw a rock on American soil and a fruit tree seems to sprout up. This is not true in China, which still struggles to find enough trees for lumber. Of 16 of the world's navigable rivers to get products to the coast for shipping, 11 are in the United States. We're blessed with an amazing geography, topography, and soil richness. China is latching onto it all with envious eyes. Starvation in China has always been a real concern, and famine is a threat to the Chinese Communist Party's grip on power. They see a real need to turn America into China's breadbasket. So they're going to the United States and buying up large portions of our supply chain, with companies like Smithfield Hams as one example. They're also sending in agents to buy up large swaths of our land, especially farming land. The Chinese would like nothing better than to see the United States collapse and dissolve into a small series of controllable client states. That way they can put their puppets into power and ship out America's natural resources to China. Which is why, during the Antifa riots, you saw Chinese agents attempting to foment social disintegration by fanning race riots. Notice how, at all the violent protests, there were Chinese handlers putting up signs directing people to websites like revcom.us. This leads to a Chinese propaganda website run out of Beijing. Revcom stands for Revolutionary Communism. You'd see signs like this everywhere during the riots over the summer, like this one. Or this one. Or this one. In Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, the economist talks about how when a country transitions from a primitive economy to an advanced economy, they now require more raw materials to create finished products. By the West giving China its technologies for decades, they created the conditions for China to become an economic competitor on the international stage. Now China is going into places like Africa and colonizing it in their quest for natural resources. The thing is, we're used to an anomalous post-World War II Bretton Woods system, where America dominated the globe and peace largely reigned internationally as the United States kept the naval trade lanes open and everyone was invited to trade freely. Historically, this is extremely unusual. The norm is for countries to have their own navies and to protect their own trade routes. This historically led to war as countries vied for limited resources in overseas colonies. After World War II, America made the world a deal. Help us with the Soviets, and we will protect the maritime trade lanes. You can trade for free and save money on not having a massive deep-sea navy. In fact, America will take a huge economic hit by losing market share, but it's all important to stop those Soviets. It was only in this post-World War II period that China's economy based on exports boomed. It's the one time in history when they weren't starving, because America kept those trade lanes open internationally. Germany too has an export-based economy based on this post-World War II Bretton Woods setup. Well, guess what? The Soviet Union is gone. Yet America is still paying to keep those trade lanes open so that other countries can prosper, at America's expense. We can no longer afford it. That system is coming to an end, which means one thing. Nations will once again be vying for overseas colonies in the race for raw materials to make cell phones and TVs and automobiles. China will be in a desperate situation to acquire aluminum, silicon, silver, and yes, food. So while they're colonizing places like Africa, they're also quietly colonizing places like Boise, Idaho, or Greenville, South Carolina, or Lincoln, Nebraska. As Spain said in 1500 when they were founding their empire, to colonize is to conquer. People fear any political leader who has his finger on the red button. What political leaders fear is people having their finger on the red button, the subscribe button. Push it and see their narratives explode. Also consider donating to help keep these videos coming. And don't forget our website and newsletter, thenewamerican.com.